Vær med og støtt dette viktige arbeidet. Gi en gave på Vips nummer 10466, eller enda bedre, bli en partner ved å gå inn på skaperkraft.no. Tusen takk for din gave.
Welcome back, Rod.
Hey, good to be here. And can we just get one thing out of the way?
Yeah.
I think the way the American administration has treated Greenland is disgraceful. Even though Donald Trump offered to let me run a McDonald's in Nuuk, I still can't support it. I know everybody was thinking about that, wondering how I thought.
Good, thank you. We invited you to speak about re-enchantment of your book, but everyone thought we invited you to speak about Trump. But we didn't. But since we had this little part about politics and Christianity, we thought we'd bring you back on stage.
Oh, good.
And my first question is this. A lot of my friends, when they first heard about you, they read the Benedict option. And you present the kind of Christianity where you say, like, forget politics, it's corrupted, it's bad. We need to build society as the Benedict monks. We need to live in tight communities. We need to, practice the spiritual rhythms, hospitality. And later on, you have become more political. You have very powerful friends. And some people think, have you forgotten? Have you thought, like, no more Benedict option, let's go for political power? What do you think?
Well, I should point out that one of the great misconceptions about my book, The Benedict Option, was that I was saying, head for the hills, let's hide out. And that was never the case. I was clear in the book that we Christians must stay involved in politics at some level, if only to protect religious freedom. But there are other issues. My point in the book, though, was that nothing in politics matters if we lose the faith and if we lose Christianity. My sense has been, over the course of my career as a journalist, that the West in general is in a state sort of like the late Roman Empire. The civilization is disintegrating. And so I asked, when I started writing about the Benedict option, I asked, what would St. Benedict do? Benedict of Nursia came down to Rome in the year 500 after the Western Empire had fallen. And all he tried to do was to figure out a way that Christians could live in ordered community in this time of chaos. And so he wrote the Rule of St. Benedict, which is just a guidebook for living in monastic community. He died in the year 547, and what he could not have foreseen is the way the monks, monasticism would spread throughout Western Europe and lay the groundwork for the rebuilding of civilization. So my idea is that what would a Benedict today do to be able to rebuild out of whatever is yet to come for our civilization? And it's true, I did say that we should de-emphasize politics, not cut them out completely, but focus more on building small communities within which we can practice the faith in a small o orthodox way, not become too corrupted by modernity, and pass the faith on to our children so the church can survive whatever is to come. Now, the book was published right after Trump was inaugurated for his first presidential term. I didn't vote for him in 2016. I didn't vote. I couldn't vote for Hillary Clinton either. There were too many moral compromises there. But what we saw in the first Trump term was the left, the woke, as we call them, became so incredibly aggressive. And not just in politics, but within the institutions that it took over, big business, universities, media, etc. And I came to realize that my opinions about politics were a bit naive. I was trying to practice some sense of, you might call it angelism, the idea of, I don't want to dirty my hands with this. I saw in the year 2018, we had a situation where a man named Brett Kavanaugh was nominated for the U.S. Supreme Court. And the left tried to destroy this man personally and professionally in a way that I thought was quite shocking. And this was when I realized that as much as I dislike him and disrespect him, Donald Trump is the only political figure standing between us and them. Because the hatred of Christians and any sort of cultural conservative was just so immense and fierce. And we could talk about particulars, but that's not, there's no need to get into that. And it's a scary time in American politics because I've never believed that Trump was a force for the good, but I think that it is perfectly legitimate when you live in a situation as radical as it has become in America and as polarized and as aggressive, it makes sense to vote for someone who will defend you. And that has, when Joe Biden won the presidency, a lot of us thought, well, things will get back to normal. But in fact, the left-wing activists were running his administration, and it got worse and worse and worse. So I'm not surprised that Christians vote for Trump. I mean, I live in Europe, but if I had lived in America, I would have voted for him too, not because I believe in him, but because I'm too afraid of the opposite, because of what they have done. But I think the real problem is placing faith in politics. The psalmist says, put not your trust in princes. And I think that the problem with American Christians of the left and of the right, but I'm of the right, so I'll speak for my side, is that we expect too much from politics. You know, I live in Hungary, and Viktor Orban is not popular in Europe, but he said something very wise about politics once. He said, people look to politicians for meaning, to give them meaning. He said, I can't give you meaning. I'm a politician. I can give you things. And by what he meant by that was that he can create through politics a space in which the institutions that are responsible for revealing meaning to society, the churches, schools, arts organizations, and so forth, politics can create a space for them to do their work. But if they don't do their work, then no gains made by politics will ever last. And I think we are in a situation, in the United States at least, where we're living out the tragic truth of that. So many Christians of the left and the right look to politics to save us. And it can't and it won't if we don't pass the faith along to our children. And you can see starting in 1991, the faith started to decline. Christian identification and participation from every denomination, Protestant, Catholic, whatever, began to decline because the previous generation of Christian leaders on the right had this idea that, the American people are fine, but the problem is the elites, and if we just get political power, we can sort everything out. Well, that was a failed strategy, and now we're living with the consequences.
Thank you. So one of my concerns, Rod, is, I don't think any of you or I believe Trump is a Christian.
No.
But he surrounds himself with quite strong believers, and I have a sense that, whatever happens in America now is so closely married with Christianity that whatever he does or says, it's like brings kind of shame on Jesus. So like this is Christianity, his politic is Christianity. Do you think the church in America has done something wrong by getting too political behind him?
Well, it's hard to speak in general about the church in America because there are real differences between Catholics and Protestants, say, and even among Protestants. The evangelicals have been the most vigorously pro-Trump. And there was even some sort of Trump worship in his first term, at least. And that has died down somewhat. But I think that the difficult thing is Trump is an immoral man, clearly, not a Christian. But he has been the only one, his administration, that has stepped up to protect not just Christians, but families. For example, under Joe Biden, he made executive orders forcing all public schools to admit male to female transgenders into locker rooms, into women's sports, and you didn't have a choice in it. If you didn't do it, you would be sued by the federal government, the power of the federal government. This was not nobody voted on this in Congress. It was an executive order. And Trump pushed back on that. So I think it is problematic to a certain extent that Christians, conservative Christians, have become so associated with Trump. But the left has become so radicalized, and even against not just political conservatives, but cultural and religious conservatives, that what's the alternative? I hope that if once Trump goes, we get someone like Marco Rubio or J.D. Vance, who are both serious Christians, but normal, and we can sort of normalize things. The problem is America is so completely polarized now that both sides, or neither side really wants to listen to the other. And identity politics has been the acid that has destroyed liberalism in America. It's not just Trump, it's the left too. And I don't know how we put it back together.
You have, you place yourself on the right, but the last half year you become a little bit unpopular on the right too, because you wrote a piece about the right is coming for...
The woke right is coming for your
sons. And then you went public against Tucker Carlson a couple of months ago. What are you seeing that is deeply troubling you on your side of the political spectrum?
My best-selling book was called Live Not by Lies. It was published in 2020, and it was about how it started with people who came to America to escape Soviet communism. They began to sense a totalitarian element in what the left was doing, the woke left was doing. The woke left began to abandon liberal principles in favor of identity politics and cancel culture. They were boycotting businesses, causing people to lose their jobs if they didn't align very strictly with woke identity politics. And that's what the book was about. We didn't see this on the right at the time, and even on the left, we didn't see anti-Semitism. It was still just a fringe thing. Well, 5 years have passed, and now we see raging anti-Semitism on both the left and the right, among the young in particular. Now, on the right, we have seen the radicalization of the so-called Zoomer generation, those in their 20s and early 30s, especially young men, who have opened themselves up to fascism, literally fascism, racism, white nationalism, white identity politics. And they've done, I know why they've done this. They've done this because they grew up in a culture that told them that everything wrong in the world is your fault because you are a white and a male. And if you are a Christian, even worse. And so they're pushing back, but they're doing it in a very nihilistic way. I remember before I went to Washington last fall on a visit, a friend of mine who's very involved in Republican politics said that about 30 to 40% of the Zoomers involved in...
That's Gen Z.
Gen Z,
yeah.
Gen Z, involved in Washington conservative politics, either in the administration or in the think tanks and so forth, sympathize with Nick Fuentes. Nick Fuentes is this...
Can you say who Nick Fuentes is?
Yeah, Nick Fuentes is this horrible young guy, 27 years old. He loves Hitler. He loves Stalin because Stalin was a strong man. He's an anti-Semite. He's a racist. He's just the worst of the worst, but he's very charismatic, and he's got a following among young people, young men especially. And I found this so shocking, 30 to 40%. But when I got to DC, I started talking to people of that age group. I would meet and say, is this true, 30 to 40%? And they all said, yeah. And I asked this one very smart Gen Z guy I know, I said, what do these people want? He said, they don't want anything. They want to tear it all down. Now, I knew from when I was studying totalitarianism for my last book, Hannah Arendt, the great 20th century political philosopher, she wrote a book called The Origins of Totalitarianism in 1951, in which she tried to understand why Russia and Germany had fallen to two very different forms of totalitarianism. She identified several characteristics of those societies, the most important being mass atomization and loneliness. And another one is people cease to care about the truth and they only care about having their narratives reinforced. They choose transgressiveness for its own sake. So when Nick Fuentes says Hitler is effing cool, oh, they love that, not because they necessarily agree that Hitler is cool, but they like anything that makes the old people mad. And they also, Arendt said, a complete lack of trust in institutions, plus the rise of anti-Semitism. Well, all of that is everywhere in America now. It was strongly on the left when I wrote the first book, and now it's on the right. So my next book is going to be about the parallels between Germany in the 1920s, the Weimar Republic, and contemporary America.
So, yeah. It's a heavy stuff, and we had breakfast this morning, and your prediction, or you hope this is not going to happen, but you're not so very hopeful for either America or Western Europe.
Yeah, I would encourage everybody here to follow on YouTube a professor at King's College London in the War Studies Department. His name is David Betz, last name spelled B-E-T-Z. David Betz is an academic expert in Civil War. And he's been saying for a couple of years now, and has gotten louder about it over the last year, that we in the West, Western Europe and America, are headed towards civil war. And he makes a very careful argument from the academic data of what we know about how civil wars start, that things are much less stable than we like to think. Now, he's not talking about armies versus armies. He says if it happens, it will be more like Lebanon in the 1980s or Northern Ireland during the Protestant Catholic fights. And what's so scary about it is how careful he is, and he just marshals the logic and the data. I've lived in Europe for the last 4 years. I can see Britain and France are getting really close to this, mostly because of migration, but there are other things too. But I found it hard to imagine in my own country. Well, now with the recent ICE raids and the polarization coming from that, I can see it happening. And he says it will involve things like assassinations, bombings, things like that, which none of us want to see. But the logic of polarization and the demonization of the other seems very hard to stop. Right now, just this morning, I looked at the news, and there was an attack on a federal U.S. government facility by a mob in Los Angeles. And the police weren't able to stop it, at least the last time I checked. I mean, this is the sort of thing that we talk about when we talk about civil war. We've had in the past week on social media nurses from hospitals putting their faces out there saying that if any agent from ICE, the immigration enforcement, or even somebody who is a Trump supporter comes to the hospital, they will refuse to treat them. And one nurse even suggested poisoning them. I mean, she lost her job. But it's just insane, not only that they would think that, but that they would put their faces and their names to it. But that's how polarized things are in America. And one thing that concerns me living in Europe is I know that the American media do a terrible job of explaining Europe to American readers and viewers. And I wonder, and I'm quite sure it must be the same way for you all, that you don't get a full picture of the details of what's happening in the United States. So, and then we're often driven to our favorite media trusted authorities, but can you really trust them? Who can you trust? That's part of the problem.
Yeah. And I think a lot of people are feeling, anxious about the future. Do you see any positivity, any hopeful? How can you become nuanced again? Because I think that's some of the problem. Yeah. We're so emotionally charged. Like you're either, a fascist or you're this. There's no nuance. There's not a lot of wanting to meet and actually talk or argue for heaven's sake, as the old rabbis would say. What's actually the truth? Well, what's the way forward for Christianity?
Well, we have to remember something that Alexander Solzhenitsyn said that I think is one of the most important things anybody said in the 20th century. He said he learned when he was in the Soviet Gulag that the line between good and evil does not pass between social classes, or you might say races or political parties, but right down the middle of every human heart. There's real humility in that, Christian humility. We have to accept that we are sinners and that we might be wrong about something. As America de-Christianizes and secularizes, we are seeing rushing into the vacuum left by the loss of Christianity, a sort of political radicalism, just as happened in Germany and Russia, but also a neo-paganism. And we Christians have to stand firm against that and offer a positive alternative. We're seeing, I remember I'm Eastern Orthodox, as you all will know, and during COVID, we saw in our little parish in South Louisiana, where Orthodoxy is very weird, we saw young people coming to our church because they were scared by COVID. COVID revealed to them how fast everything could fall apart. And I talked to this one young evangelical couple, and I said, welcome to our church, but what brings you here? They said that COVID had frightened them so much that they realized the megachurch Christianity, the happy clappy, self-improvement, be nice Christianity was not going to be enough to help them survive as Christians through the collapse of civilization, if it came to that. And I think there's something really true about that. Now, I'm not saying everybody should convert to Orthodoxy or whatever, but I am saying that Christians need to bear witness through whatever is coming to the hope that Jesus Christ gives us. As I said last night in the talk, hope for a Christian is not the same thing as optimism. I'm not optimistic about the near future or even the long-term future for the West. But I am hopeful because I'm a Christian. And the hope consists in knowing that even if we have to suffer, even to the point of martyrdom, I hope it doesn't come to that, but even if it did, as long as we unite our suffering to Christ, it has ultimate meaning. And I think one of the things that we need to do now is, as Christians, is to read the stories of the Christians under communism and under Nazism who bore witness to the truth, even with their lives. Because it may come to that with us. And even if it doesn't come to giving your life, the fact that people need to be able to see ordinary people, that there are sane, loving, compassionate people, but also people of principle who aren't afraid to take a stand for the truth, even if it makes them unpopular. One thing to be practical about it, I learned something really important from a man named Václav Benda. He died in 1999, but he and his wife Camilla were the only Christians in the inner circle of the Czech anti-communist resistance. And Václav Benda knew, he was Catholic, he knew that there was no way to practice ordinary politics under totalitarianism, but he also felt that he still had a responsibility to do something. Well, politics most basically is working out how we live together in peace and flourish. What he did was invite his neighbors out for a picnic in the park, just to get them out of their houses so they could see each other face to face and realize that we're all human, we're all part of the community, because he knew that the communists kept themselves in power in part by making everyone feel isolated. So I think one very practical thing we can do as Christians or as citizens is get off of our smartphones, get off of the laptop, get out of our house and meet each other and just talk. We don't even have to talk about politics, but just talk and realize that your neighbor is a human being. It's a suffering human being just like you.
Thank you. I struggled sleeping last night because I was full of thoughts after yesterday and today, and I was thinking about Christianity, nationalism, all these things. And I remember from my master's degree that the book that maybe spoke and touched me most was from the Rwanda war there. From, I think it's called Kong, I don't remember his last name, the one who wrote it. But he said, like, it was sad to read his story from Rwanda and say, like, the church was part of it. And the horror story. And he said something, a quote like, the blood ran thicker than the baptism. It was more important with your ethnicity and belonging to your group than your Christian faith.
Yeah.
Do you see that? And he said, what was missing in Rwanda was the prophetic posture. He said, we're pastoral. Even the priests would give communion after they would literally slaughter down people. So they had a lot of care, but they didn't dare to speak truth and to put, the church to speak truth in this horrible, horrible situation.
Because it requires courage. And it not only requires courage, it requires being able to stand back from the immediacy of your situation and get some sort of historical perspective. I remember one thing that really shocked me. I'm from a small town in South Louisiana, town of 2,000 people, a village on the Mississippi River. I moved back to this village in the year 2011 after my sister died. And when I was there, I learned from a friend that in 1964, 3 years before I was born, there had been a riot on the courthouse lawn, a white riot, because an angry white mob rioted when a black pastor registered to vote. This was the age of the Civil Rights Movement, the Ku Klux Klan. And it was so shocking to me to read this because I grew up in the town after these battles. Nobody ever talked about it. And I thought, how could this have happened in my peaceful little town? But of course it did. And I was feeling very judgmental about my parents' generation. That was their generation. But then I realized my parents' generation grew up in a time before mass media. I mean, yes, they had newspapers, but the newspapers would never talk about race. They didn't have TV. And the only place I ever heard anything about racism being bad growing up as a child in the 70s was on TV. The pastors certainly in the village would never speak about white supremacy. So the reason I bring this story up is because I had to realize if I had been a young man in that town back then, I might have been in that mob too. In the same way I probably would have been in the mob in Jerusalem saying, crucify him, crucify him. None of this, of course, is to justify this, but it is to say that it's so easy to go with the crowd, whether the crowd is a left-wing crowd or a right-wing crowd, and to dehumanize the people around us. The hardest thing to do is to be courageous, especially when it could cost you your life. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister of Canada, in his speech at Davos last week, he brought up the famous story that Václav Havel told about the greengrocer. Havel, who was a Czech dissident who became the first president of free Czechoslovakia, he told a parable. He said, imagine you're a greengrocer under communism, and all the businesses in town have a sign in the window that says, "Workers of the world unite." Nobody believes it, but everyone has the sign there because they're afraid not to conform. One day, the greengrocer takes the sign down saying, "I will not live in this lie." What happens to him? Well, he's arrested by the secret police. They take his business away. He has to suffer. Maybe his job after that is to become a street sweeper or a garbage man. His children are denied opportunities, and so forth. So he's been defeated in one way. But, says Havel, he's won a great moral victory. And if other people who also know they're living in a system of lies, if they see that it is possible to stand up to the lies, if you are willing to accept suffering, then more and more people may do that, and the system built on lies may fall. Well, Havel was not a Christian, but this is a call to us, Christians, whatever the lies are, whether they come from the left or the right, to take a stand, even if it costs you something, because you are ultimately accountable to God. But not only that, you can be a leader in your own community in ways you may not even be aware of, not even in this life. When St. Benedict did what he did, when he died in 547, he had founded 13 monasteries around Rome, which would have been an impressive life if that's all he had done. But over the next several hundred years, the monastic movement exploded in Europe, and there were thousands of monasteries founded that helped slowly Christianize Western Europe. So the one act of sacrifice and courage that we do for the sake of the Lord can have consequences that are beyond our control for the good. And that's all we that's all we can be asked to do.
Thank you, Rod. It'd be great to talk more to you, but we have more stuff going on. Give him a hand. Thank you.
Tankesmien Skaperkraft mulig takket være folkefinansiert støtte fra våre partnere og givere.
Vær med og støtt dette viktige arbeidet. Gi en gave på Vips nummer 10466, eller enda bedre, bli en partner ved å gå inn på skaperkraft.no. Tusen takk for din gave.